You're crouched next to a fire. It's 50,000 years ago. The sun went down hours ago, and it took all the warmth in the world with it. There's no roof, no blanket that deserves the name. Just you, the flames, and a thick rope of smoke bending straight into your face. You cough, you wipe your eyes, you lean away, and then, maybe, you stop. You look at that smoke curling up into the dark, and a thought arrives that no animal before you has ever had. What if I breathed that on purpose? This is the story of how humans started smoking. Not cigarettes, not cigars, not the co-worker who traps you by the door for 20 minutes. We're talking about the very first time a human being chose to pull something burning into their lungs, and why that choice might be one of the oldest habits our whole species has. Because here's the part nobody tells you. Smoking doesn't begin with tobacco. It doesn't begin with Columbus or trade routes or farming. The urge to breathe smoke might be wired into us so deep that it's older than civilization itself. Let me show you why. Before you can smoke anything, you need one thing: fire. And humans have been keeping company with fire for an almost unbelievable amount of time. Deep inside a cave in South Africa, a place called Wonderwerk, archaeologists found burnt bone and ash, roughly 30 meters from daylight, too far inside for a wildfire to reach. The age? Around 1 million years. 1 million. Back then, we weren't even us yet. That fire was tended by Homo erectus, an older cousin, smaller brain, heavier brow, and exactly zero interest in your opinion. They cooked, they stayed warm, they huddled in the dark, and every single one of them breathed smoke. Think about that. For hundreds of thousands of years, every human and an almost human who sat near a fire inhaled it. Not by choice, just by being there. It was the original air quality problem, and nobody had an app to check it. But here's where it stops being ordinary, because not all of that smoke was just burning wood. When you burn a plant, you don't just get heat and ash, you get chemistry. A whole cocktail of compounds, and exactly which ones depends on what's in the fire. And some plants, when they burn, release chemicals that do something to the human brain. Compounds that reach in and flip switches you didn't know you had. Cannabis does it, wild tobacco does it, a poisonous little plant called henbane does it. So picture the campfire again. Somebody tosses on a handful of the wrong or the right greenery, and everyone sitting downwind slowly starts to feel good, strange, lifted, and they have absolutely no idea why. This isn't a fringe idea. Researchers have argued for decades that early humans, living surrounded by wild plants, would have been breathing psychoactive smoke on a regular basis, completely by accident. And here's the detail that makes it eerie. Your brain has receptors built for this. We have an entire system, the endocannabinoid system, with locks that cannabis-type compounds fit like keys. It did not evolve because of cannabis. It runs your mood, your memory, your appetite, but it means that when a human first breathed cannabis smoke, their brain wasn't confused. Their brain said, "Oh, hello, I've been waiting for you." So maybe smoking was never really invented. Maybe it was rediscovered. A happy accident, stumbled into around a fire, felt, remembered, and eventually repeated on purpose. Sit with how strange that is. The centuries of ritual, the shamans, the medicine, the entire future weight of this habit may have started because one exhausted hunter sat downwind of the wrong bush and had a suspiciously wonderful evening. History is beautiful sometimes, in the dumbest possible way. Now we have to be careful, because two sentences that sound the same are not the same. Ancient humans breathed smoke from plants. That's one claim. Ancient humans deliberately grew and burned plants to get high. That's a much bigger one. So let's ask what the hard evidence actually proves. The oldest solid proof of intentional smoking comes from the Pamir Mountains of Central Asia, around 500 BC. In a burial site, archaeologists found wooden braziers holding stones that had been heated until they cracked and clinging to them the residue of cannabis. Not the weak, ropey kind grown for fiber, this plant was unusually strong, rich in exactly the chemical that gets you high, and it was placed in a grave on purpose as part of a funeral. 2,500 years ago, someone was burning the good stuff to send off their dead. But here's the question that should be nagging at you. Does the fact that this is the oldest proof mean it's the first time? Or does it just mean this is the oldest one that survived? Because think about what smoking actually leaves behind. Almost nothing. We find stone tools from 3 million years ago because stone is basically forever. But a wooden pipe packed with dried leaves, gone in a few centuries in ordinary ground, a leather pouch of cannabis dissolved back into the dirt long before any archaeologist showed up with a brush. So for smoking, silence doesn't mean it didn't happen. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. We are almost certainly blind to most of this story, staring at a handful of survivors and calling it the beginning. And sometimes the written word gets there before the shovel does. Meet Herodotus, a Greek historian writing in the 5th century BC and the ancient world's most enthusiastic collector of strange stories. He described a people called the Scythians, horse riders of the open grassland, doing something he could barely believe. They'd build a small tent, seal it tight, heat stones until they glowed, throw cannabis onto them, and then sit inside the smoke and, in his words, howl with joy. For centuries, scholars read that and rolled their eyes. Classic Herodotus, believing tall tales again. Then archaeologists started opening Scythian burial mounds, and they found them. The tent frames, the metal braziers, the heated stones, the cannabis residue, exactly what he described, down to the setup. He wasn't exaggerating. If anything, he was underselling it. Now let's talk about the plant most people actually picture when they hear the word smoking. Tobacco. Tobacco is a plant called Nicotiana, and here's the fact that changes everything. It is native only to the Americas, which means for most of history, the entire Old World, Europe, Africa, Asia, had never seen it. Not a single leaf. That changes in 1492. When Columbus and his crew reached the Caribbean, they noticed the locals doing something bizarre. People walking around with small, glowing bundles, breathing in the smoke of burning, dried leaves and letting it drift back out through their noses. The sailors were baffled. The sailors also, within about a week, tried it themselves, because of course they did. But, and this is the myth we need to kill, tobacco in the Americas is far, far older than Columbus. In northern Alabama, at a site on the Flint River, scientists found nicotine inside an ancient smoking tube dated to around 3,500 years ago. Some researchers think tobacco cultivation in the Amazon could run back even further, possibly 10,000 years, though that's still an argument, not a fact. Columbus didn't discover smoking. He stumbled into a world that had been smoking longer than Rome had existed, and here's what mattered most about that world. In the ancient Americas, tobacco was not casual. It was sacred. It was medicine. It was how you spoke to the spirit world. It was how you sealed an agreement between enemies. Blowing smoke over someone wasn't rude. It was a blessing, a gift, a bond. When a shaman smoked, he wasn't taking a break. He was opening a door. The smoke itself was treated as something alive, a messenger, rising up carrying prayers, drifting down carrying visions. That's why so many cultures handled tobacco with such discipline for thousands of years. When a thing is sacred, you don't burn through it while half watching television. The idea of smoking as a throwaway habit, something you do at a bus stop, on a lunch break, barely noticing, That is almost entirely a European invention, and a recent one. But we can go older, much older, and this piece is one most people have never heard. In 2019, in the Great Salt Lake Desert in Utah, researchers dug into an ancient hearth, a fireplace, roughly 12,000 years old. Inside it, they found the tiny seeds of a wild North American tobacco. These weren't seeds that had drifted in on the wind. They were concentrated, gathered, placed, and this fire predates any pipe or pottery in the region by thousands of years. 12,000 years ago, at the very edge of the Ice Age, someone was already feeding tobacco to a fire, and that detonates a much bigger question. If people in America were doing this 12,000 years ago, whether to breathe the smoke or for ritual or both, then what were humans on every other continent doing with their local plants at the exact same time? Because 12,000 years ago, humans were everywhere. Africa, Asia, Europe, Australia, and the hunger to change how your own mind feels, to step outside ordinary consciousness for a while, that is not an American thing. It's a human thing. Let me hand you an idea that sounds wild but is taken seriously by real anthropologists. It's called the intoxication hypothesis. It goes like this. In nearly every human culture ever recorded, people have found some way to alter their minds. They've brewed alcohol, eaten strange mushrooms, chewed bitter leaves, swallowed seeds, and breathed smoke. This behavior is so universal, so stubborn, and so independent, showing up in cultures that never met, that some scientists think it can't be a coincidence. They think it's built in. A psychopharmacologist named Ronald Siegel argued exactly that. He called the pursuit of intoxication a fourth drive, sitting right alongside hunger, thirst, and sex. And he pointed out, we're not even the only animals who do it. In Siberia, reindeer deliberately seek out a hallucinogenic mushroom, the fly agaric, the classic red one with white spots. They eat it to feel something. And the effect is so prized that the compounds get passed on and reused through their animals' urine. Reindeer running their own recycling program. Honestly, respect. The point is this: if the drive to alter the mind runs that deep and reaches that far back, then it's completely reasonable that humans were seeking out smoke long before any pipe we will ever dig up. The artifact is young. The urge is ancient. So picture it, long before pottery, before farming, before any of the tools we file under smoking, humans are out among the plants, running the oldest experiment there is. Which smoke makes you feel wonderful? Which smoke heals a cough? And which smoke makes you feel like you're dying? A lesson that, with certain plants, you only get to learn once. This is trial and error. Prehistoric edition, high stakes, occasionally fatal, but the ones who guessed right remembered. And they told the others. No books, no schools, just knowledge, lived and memorized and handed down, mouth to ear, around a fire in the dark, which, for almost all of human history, is exactly how knowledge worked. And there's a use for smoke we almost never talk about. Long before it was recreation, and maybe before it was ritual, smoke was medicine. One of the oldest medical documents on Earth is the Ebers Papyrus from ancient Egypt, around 1550 BC, and it describes treating breathing problems by burning herbs, including henbane, and having the patient inhale the smoke through a reed. Read that again. The ancient Egyptians treated sick lungs by having people breathe smoke. It sounds completely backwards, but henbane genuinely contains active compounds, and delivered through smoke they actually do something. It wasn't random. The Greeks did it too. Hippocrates himself, the man behind the oath doctors still swear, wrote about inhaling herbal vapors to treat the lungs. And in India, Ayurvedic medicine had a whole practice for it, called dhumapana. It literally translates to drinking smoke. Specific herbs, specific conditions, specific recipes, a serious medical system thousands of years deep. And the strangest part? That core idea never died. We still send medicines straight to the lungs today, asthma inhalers, nebulizers, anesthetic gases. The delivery method survived for 3,000 years. The burning part, thankfully, mostly didn't. It stuck around because in a world with no antibiotics and no surgery, it worked. Or at least, it worked often enough to keep doing it. And work sometimes was a very high bar back then. There's one more reason smoke mattered, and it might be the deepest one of all. Humans are built for the group. For almost our entire history, staying together was survival. A lone human died. A tight, trusting band lived. So anything that pulled people closer, that built trust you could bet your life on, had real evolutionary value. And there are few things on Earth better at bonding people than a shared ritual, especially a shared altered state. When a group goes through an intense experience together, when they step out of ordinary reality side by side, they come back trusting each other in a way ordinary conversation can never build. Modern neuroscience backs the basic idea. Perform a ritual in sync with other people, and your brains start to line up. Trust rises. The sense of us gets stronger in ways you can actually measure. So when a band of ancient humans sealed themselves in a tent, breathed the same smoke, and slipped into the same haze together, that wasn't just a party. That was technology, social technology. It was how you forged the kind of trust that let a group walk into something dangerous and walk back out alive. The smoke circle wasn't recreation, it was infrastructure. And now, we reach the part of the story that hurts. Because the road from sacred smoke to casual habit is, historically, a catastrophe. When tobacco lands in Europe in the 1500s, it spreads at a speed that should feel familiar. Within decades, it goes from exotic curiosity to continental obsession. By the 1600s, it's a global trade good. By the 1700s, powdered snuff is fashionable in every royal court. By the 1800s, cigars are everywhere. And then comes the machine-made cigarette. Cheaper, faster, and more addictive than anything humans had ever put to their lips. What took Indigenous Americans thousands of years to hold as something measured and sacred, European industry flattened into a mass-market product in about 400. And in the 20th century, it got darker. The tobacco industry buried its own research showing cigarettes caused cancer. It marketed to children. It paid doctors to smile and endorse. It re-engineered nicotine itself to hit faster, fade quicker, and hook you harder. Something ancient and reverent and communal got turned into a product designed on purpose to be as destructive and as profitable as physically possible. A shaman in 500 BC placing cannabis on hot stones to speak with the dead. A cigarette executive in 1960 signing off on ads aimed at teenagers. They held the same kind of plant. They had almost nothing else in common. That gap is one of the widest moral chasms in all of human history, and both ends of it are made of smoke. So, when did ancient humans start smoking? The honest answer is, we don't know exactly, and we probably never will. The hard, physical evidence takes us back around 12,000 years with real confidence, and further back on reasonable, careful guesswork. But the behavior underneath it, the drive to alter the mind, to share a ritual, to breathe medicine into the lungs, that is almost certainly older than any object we have ever found. Maybe as old as fire, maybe as old as the mind itself, because look at what smoking really is stripped all the way down. It's a creature staring at a burning plant and thinking, last time this happened, I felt different. Let me do that again. That's not addiction. That's cause and effect. That's intelligence. And here's the one thing we can say for certain. By the time the written record opens, Everywhere on Earth that humans lived, they were already finding ways to put smoke inside their bodies. The plants were different, the rituals were different, the reasons were different, but the behavior was already old, already worn smooth by time, already ancient by the time anyone first thought to write it down. And there's something quietly beautiful in that. For everything that separates us from the people who came before, the cities, the medicine, the glowing screens, the endless noise, a few thin threads run unbroken through 100,000 years of being human. Fire, smoke, breath. The oldest humans sat by a fire and breathed the same smoky air you'd catch off a bonfire tonight. And somewhere along the way, some of them started paying attention to what that smoke was doing to them. And then they started choosing it. And then they passed that choice on to their children and their children's children, down through the Scythians howling in their tents, the Egyptian healers with their reeds of henbane, the shamans reading the future in the rising smoke, and the people on a Caribbean beach watching a group of strangers try tobacco for the first time and cough until their eyes streamed. So the next time you catch a thread of wood smoke on a cold night, pause on it. You're doing the oldest human thing there is. You're breathing. Next time on Ancient Humans Stickwise, the oldest beer ever brewed wasn't made to get you drunk. Some think it was brewed for the dead. If you want to keep digging into the deep human past with us, subscribe and take the next step down.